In a quiet little town in Texas where the sun baked the earth and the air carried the faint smell of gasoline and barbecue, there was a diner that everyone seemed to love. It wasn't fancy, just a simple place with red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and a jukebox in the corner that played old country songs. The kind of spot where truck drivers stopped for coffee, locals gathered to talk about football games, and tourists occasionally wandered in, hoping for a taste of small-town charm. On this particular afternoon, Lieutenant Maya Johnson sat alone, in one of those red booths, sipping sweet iced tea and scrolling through pictures of her nieces on her phone. She had just returned home from an extended tour overseas, where she'd spent years serving in the U.S. Army. Her life had been filled with missions, long hours of training, and moments of sheer adrenaline. But now, she was on leave, trying to soak up some peace and quiet before heading back to duty. The diner felt like the perfect escape, a cozy, familiar place where no one expected anything from her except maybe ordering another slice of pie. Maya looked different today than she did when she was in uniform. Instead of combat gear, she wore a plain white t-shirt, faded jeans, and sneakers. Her dark hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and her face was free of makeup. To anyone passing by, she might have looked like just another customer enjoying lunch. But if they paid closer attention, they would notice something else about her, the way she held herself. Even out of uniform, Maya carried herself with a quiet confidence, her posture straight, her movements deliberate. It was the kind of bearing that came from years of discipline, from knowing exactly what your body could do and how to use it effectively. The diner buzzed with its usual energy. A waitress moved briskly between tables, balancing plates of burgers and fries. Two older men sat at the counter, arguing good-naturedly about last night's baseball game. Outside, cars rumbled past, their engines growling as they sped down the highway. Everything seemed normal, until the door swung open with a loud creak, and a group of bikers walked in. They were hard to miss. Their leather jackets gleamed under the fluorescent lights, adorned with patches and symbols that hinted at a lifestyle far removed from the quiet rhythms of the diner. Chains jingled around their waists, and heavy boots thudded against the floor as they made their way to a booth near the window. There were 5 of them, all big men with weathered faces and tattoos snaking up their arms. They laughed loudly, their voices cutting through the hum of conversation like a chainsaw through wood. At first, Maya didn't pay much attention. She kept her eyes on her phone, scrolling absently while sipping her tea. But then she felt it, a shift in the air, a subtle change in the atmosphere. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw one of the bikers staring at her. He was tall, even by biker standards, with a thick beard and piercing blue eyes. His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, and when he turned to whisper something to his friends, they all laughed. Maya ignored it. She'd dealt with stares and whispers before, too many times to count, and she knew better than to let it bother her. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way the biker's eyes narrowed slightly, or the way his jaw tightened as he continued to watch her. Whatever it was, it set off a tiny alarm bell in the back of her mind. As the minutes ticked by, the biker grew bolder. He leaned over to his buddies, saying something that made them chuckle again, their glances darting toward Maya. One of them pointed at her, and another nodded, smirking. It was clear they were talking about her, though Maya couldn't hear what they were saying. She tried to focus on her phone, but the tension in the room was building, pressing down on her like a weight. Finally, the biker stood up. He grabbed a chair from a nearby table and dragged it across the floor, the screech of metal against tile making everyone wince. Then, without asking, he plopped himself down right across from Maya, blocking her view of the window. His presence was overwhelming. He smelled of cigarettes and leather, and his massive frame took up almost the entire bench. For a moment, the only sound in the diner was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. "Well, well," the biker said, his voice low and mocking. "What do we have here? A little birdie told me you don't belong in this town." He grinned, revealing teeth stained yellow from years of smoking. "Or maybe I should say you don't belong in this country." Maya froze, her fingers hovering over her phone. She didn't respond immediately, choosing instead to study him carefully. She'd learned early in her career that words mattered. How you said them, when you said them, and whether you said them at all. Right now, silence was her best weapon. Let him talk. Let him reveal himself. But the biker mistook her calm demeanor for fear. His grin widened and he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You deaf or something?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. "I'm talking to you." The other customers glanced nervously between Maya and the biker, unsure of what to do. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others pretended not to notice, keeping their heads down. The waitress hovered near the counter, clutching a tray of dirty dishes like a shield. No one wanted to get involved. Maya finally looked up, meeting the biker's gaze directly. Her brown eyes were steady, unflinching. She didn't say a word, but her expression spoke volumes. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to intimidate her, and it wouldn't be the last. What the biker didn't know, what none of them knew, was that beneath her calm exterior lay years of military training, countless hours spent honing her skills in hand-to-hand combat, and a deep reservoir of patience built from surviving some of the most dangerous situations imaginable. For a brief moment, the biker hesitated. Something in Maya's eyes gave him pause, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. But then he shook it off, leaning even closer until his nose was practically touching hers. "You think you're tough, huh?" he sneered. "Sitting here, like you own the place." That's when things started to escalate. The biker reached out, grabbing Maya's arm roughly, jerking her out of her seat. In that instant, everything changed. The biker's grip on Maya's arm was firm, almost crushing, as he yanked her out of her seat. The sudden movement sent her phone clattering to the floor, its screen lighting up briefly before going dark. For a split second, the entire diner seemed to freeze, caught in the tension of what had just happened. People stopped eating mid-bite, forks hovering in the air. Conversations died instantly, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed down on everyone like a heavy blanket. Even the jukebox seemed quieter, its cheerful tune now feeling oddly out of place. Maya didn't flinch. Years of combat training had taught her how to stay calm under pressure, and right now she needed all of that discipline. Her heart rate barely rose as she assessed the situation with practiced precision. She could feel the biker's fingers digging into her skin, but instead of reacting impulsively, she focused on his body language. The way his weight shifted slightly forward, the angle of his shoulders, the fact that he was leaning too far over the table. To anyone else, it might have looked like aggression, but to Maya, it was information. Information she could use. "You deaf or something?" The biker growled again, his voice louder this time, laced with frustration. He tightened his grip, pulling her closer until their faces were only inches apart. His breath smelled of stale beer and cigarettes, and his eyes burned with anger. "I said, you don't belong here." The words stung, not because they held any truth, but because they were so familiar. Maya had heard variations of them throughout her life. Whispered insults when she walked into classrooms as a child, muttered comments during her early days. In the military, even casual remarks disguised as jokes at work events. Each time she'd chosen not to engage, knowing that responding would only give the offender more power. But today felt different. Today, this man wasn't just hurling hateful words. He was crossing a line, physically asserting dominance in a way that demanded a response. Still, Maya didn't say anything. Instead, she let her actions speak for her. With a fluid motion, she twisted her wrist sharply, using the leverage of his own grip against him. The move was so quick and precise that the biker barely had time to react. One moment, he was holding onto her arm, smirking confidently. The next, he stumbled backward, his balance thrown off completely. His chair tipped over with a loud crash, drawing gasps from the other diners. For a few seconds, no one moved. The biker stood there, blinking in confusion as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. Then embarrassment flushed across his face, turning his cheeks red beneath his scruffy beard. He glanced at his friends who were watching silently from their booth, unsure whether to laugh or intervene. Their earlier smirks had faded. replaced by expressions of shock and unease. "Whoa," one of them muttered under his breath, though not loudly enough for anyone outside their group to hear. The biker recovered quickly, however. Humiliation transformed into rage, and he clenched his fists, glaring at Maya. "You think you're funny, huh?" he spat, taking a step toward her. "You want to play games? Fine, let's play." Maya remained perfectly still, her feet planted firmly on the ground. She didn't take a defensive stance. No raised fists, no crouching posture. To the untrained eye, she might have appeared relaxed, almost casual, but every muscle in her body was coiled tightly, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. Her mind raced through scenarios, calculating angles and distances. If he swung first, she'd dodge left. If he lunged, she'd pivot right. Every possibility played out in her head like a simulation, each outcome mapped out with surgical precision. But the biker didn't seem to notice any of this. All he saw was a woman standing in front of him, refusing to back down. To him, that was unthinkable. A challenge to his authority, a direct insult to his ego. And in his world, challenges like that couldn't go unanswered. With a roar of fury, he lunged at her, swinging his massive fist in a wide arc. It was a clumsy attack, fueled more by emotion than skill, but it carried enough force to knock someone unconscious if it landed. The other customers ducked reflexively, shielding their faces as if expecting chaos to erupt. Some even scrambled to leave, pushing open the diner doors and spilling out onto the street. Maya didn't flinch. At the last possible second, she sidestepped, gracefully, her movements smooth and controlled. The biker's punch missed her entirely, sailing past her shoulder with a whoosh of air. Momentum carried him forward, throwing him off balance once again. Before he could recover, Maya acted. She stepped behind him, grabbing his arm and twisting it upward in a lock that immobilized him instantly. The move was textbook perfect, executed with such efficiency that it looked almost effortless. "Stop," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the stunned silence of the room. There was no anger in her tone, no hint of fear, just calm authority. "Don't make me hurt you." The biker struggled against her hold, grunting and thrashing wildly. But Maya's grip was unyielding, her strength surprising given her smaller frame. She applied just enough pressure to keep him pinned without causing serious injury, maintaining complete control of the situation. Slowly, reluctantly, he stopped fighting, his breathing ragged and uneven. What are you?" he panted, his voice trembling with a mix of pain and disbelief. "Some kind of cop?" Maya didn't answer. Instead, she released him with a sharp shove, sending him stumbling backward. He tripped over the fallen chair, landing hard on his knees. For a moment he stayed there, staring up at her with wide, fearful eyes. The arrogance was gone now, replaced by something else. Respect, maybe. Or perhaps just raw survival instinct. The diner was deathly quiet, the kind of silence that made every creak of the floorboard sound deafening. No one dared to speak. Even the waitress had frozen in place, her tray of dishes forgotten in her hands. All eyes were on Maya, who stood tall and composed, brushing imaginary dust off her jeans as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred. Then, slowly, the spell broke. Someone near the counter began to clap softly, hesitantly. Another person joined, then another, until the entire diner erupted into applause. It started quietly but grew louder, filling the space with a sense of awe and admiration. Maya turned to look at the crowd, surprised by the reaction. She hadn't done this for recognition or approval. She'd simply defended herself, the same way she'd been trained to do countless times before. One of the older men at the counter tipped his hat respectfully. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you've got guts. Real guts." Maya nodded politely, appreciating the sentiment but not letting it distract her. She bent down to pick up her phone, checking it briefly to make sure it still worked. Satisfied that it was fine, she slid it into her pocket and grabbed her purse. As much as she wanted to stay and finish her meal, the mood in the diner had shifted irrevocably. The confrontation had changed everything, for better or worse, and she knew it was time to go. As she walked toward the exit, The other bikers parted silently to let her pass, their earlier bravado replaced by wary respect. None of them said a word, but their body language spoke volumes. They understood now that Maya wasn't someone to be trifled with, and they weren't about to test her further. When she pushed open the door and stepped outside, the bright sunlight hit her face, warming her skin. She took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. Despite everything that had happened, she felt strangely at peace. This wasn't the first time she'd faced hatred head-on, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But in moments like these, she reminded herself why she did what she did, not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved to live without fear of being targeted for who they were. And as she climbed into her car and drove away, leaving the diner and its stunned patrons behind, Maya knew one thing for certain. Standing up to bullies wasn't just about winning fights. It was about sending a message that strength came in many forms, and courage wasn't defined by size or gender or background. It was defined by the willingness to stand your ground, no matter the odds. As Maya stepped out of the diner, the applause from inside still ringing faintly in her ears, she couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions swirling inside her. On one hand, there was relief. Relief that the situation hadn't escalated further. Relief that she'd managed to handle it without causing unnecessary harm. But on the other hand, there was frustration. Frustration that even after all these years in a place as ordinary as a roadside diner, racism could rear its ugly head so brazenly. It wasn't just about the biker or his friends. It was about the culture that allowed such behavior to thrive unchecked. The bright sunlight outside felt almost surreal compared to the tense atmosphere she'd just left behind. Maya paused for a moment, leaning against her car and closing her eyes. She took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the sun wash over her. For someone who had spent most of her adult life navigating war zones and high-stakes missions, this small-town incident shouldn't have rattled her. And yet it did. Not because she doubted her ability to defend herself, far from it, but because it reminded her how pervasive ignorance could be. No matter how many battles she won overseas, the fight against prejudice at home always seemed endless. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. Pulling it out, she saw a text from her sister. "How's your day going? Still alive?" The message made her smile despite everything. Her family had a way of lightening. Even the heaviest moments, she typed back quickly. "Alive and kicking. Just had to teach a lesson at lunch." Before hitting send, she hesitated. Should she really share what happened? Would they worry too much? Ultimately, she decided to keep it vague. They'd ask questions later and she'd tell them then. Sliding into the driver's seat, Maya started the engine and pulled onto the road. As she drove, her mind replayed the scene in slow motion. The biker's sneer, the way his grip tightened around her arm, the stunned expressions of the other customers when she disarmed him with ease. Part of her wished she could forget the whole thing, chalk it up to another random encounter in a long line of them. But another part of her knew better. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of something bigger, something systemic. And while she couldn't fix the world overnight, she could make sure people remembered this moment. By the time she reached her parents' house, a modest brick home nestled on the edge of town, Maya had resolved to focus on the positive. She didn't want to dwell on the negativity of the day. Instead, she wanted to reconnect with the things that mattered most: family, love, and the quiet joys of being home. Her mom was already waiting on the porch, waving enthusiastically as Maya parked the car. "There you are," her mom called out, rushing down the steps to greet her. "We were starting to think you got lost." "Not exactly," Maya replied, with a grin, hugging her tightly. "Just delayed." Her dad emerged next, wiping his hands on a rag. He raised an eyebrow, eyeing her carefully. "Delayed? You look like you've been wrestling bears again." Maya chuckled, shaking her head. "Close enough." Over dinner, a hearty spread of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and greens, her parents pressed her for details. At first, she tried to brush it off, saying only that some bikers had gotten rowdy at the diner. But her sister, Keisha, wasn't having any of it. "Come on, Maya," she teased. "You don't get that look unless something major went down." Spill. So, reluctantly, Maya told them the story. She kept it light, focusing more on the absurdity of the situation than the anger it stirred in her. When she described how the biker lunged at her and missed, her dad burst out laughing. "Bet he didn't see that coming," he said, shaking, his head in disbelief. Her mom, however, looked concerned. "Are you okay? These kinds of people, they don't play fair." "I'm fine, Mom," Maya assured her. "Trust me, I've dealt with worse." The conversation eventually shifted to lighter topics, Keisha's new job, their plans for the weekend, but Maya noticed something different about her parents' demeanor. They seemed prouder of her than usual, as if her actions at the diner had somehow validated everything they'd ever hoped for her. It was a strange feeling, knowing that standing up to a bully had earned her a new level of respect, even within her own family. Later that evening, as Maya sat on the porch swing with her dad sipping lemonade and watching the sunset, the topic came up again. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "what you did today, it matters. People need to see that courage isn't about size or numbers. It's about standing firm when others try to push you down." Maya nodded, staring out at the horizon. "I just wish it didn't have to come to that. I mean, why does anyone think they can treat someone else like that? Like they're less human?" Her dad sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Ignorance is powerful, sweetheart. It feeds on fear and insecurity. But so is bravery. And sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to back down to remind everyone else what real strength looks like." His words stayed with her long, after the stars came out and the crickets began chirping in the distance. By the time she went to bed that night, Maya had made peace with what had happened, at least for now. She knew the memory would linger, tucked away in the corners of her mind, ready to resurface whenever she encountered similar situations in the future. But for tonight, she let herself rest, knowing she'd done what needed to be done. Next morning, Maya woke up early, unable to shake the restless energy buzzing through her veins. Normally, she'd go for a run to clear her head, but today felt different. Today, she wanted answers. Driving back into town, she headed straight for the diner. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few cars belonging to staff and early morning regulars. Inside, the atmosphere was subdued, almost reverent. The waitress who had served her the day before greeted her warmly, offering a free cup of coffee as an apology for not stepping in sooner. "You handled yourself real well," the woman said, admiration in her voice. "We've been dealing with those guys for years. Never seen anyone stand up to them like that." Maya accepted the coffee with a nod, sitting at the same booth where the confrontation had taken place. She scanned the room, noticing subtle changes. A young couple seated nearby gave her a shy smile, whispering to each other as if sharing a secret. An older man tipped his hat respectfully as he passed by. Even the cook poked his head out from the kitchen, giving her a thumbs up before disappearing again. It dawned on her then, her actions hadn't just affected her or the bikers. They'd rippled outward, touching everyone who witnessed them. Some might argue that standing up to bullies only fueled the cycle of violence, but Maya disagreed. Sometimes showing strength, real, unshakable strength, was the only way to break the pattern. It sent a message not just to the aggressors but to the bystanders too. You don't have to accept hatred. You don't have to stay silent. Before leaving, Maya paid for her coffee and left a generous tip. As she walked back to her car, she noticed something else. The biker gang's bikes were gone. Whether they'd skipped town entirely or simply avoided the diner, she couldn't say. Either way, their absence spoke volumes. Word traveled fast in small towns, and chances were good that the story of the black woman who took down a racist biker had already spread far beyond these walls. Driving home, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight against prejudice wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone willing to stand up and speak out. And while she couldn't change the world single-handedly, she could inspire others to join the effort. One diner, one town, one courageous act at a time. By the time Maya returned to her parents' house later that afternoon, the story of what had happened at the diner was already spreading like wildfire through the small town. News traveled fast in places like this, where everyone knew everyone else, or at least thought they did. By evening, it seemed as though half the town had heard some version of the tale. A black woman, quiet and unassuming, had stood up to a group of intimidating bikers and left them humiliated. People whispered about it in grocery stores, discussed it over coffee, and even debated it on local radio shows. At first, Maya tried to ignore the attention. She wasn't looking for fame or recognition. She'd simply defended herself when provoked. But as the days passed, it became impossible to avoid. Strangers approached her in public, thanking her for standing up to the bikers. Some shared their own stories of harassment or discrimination, confessing how inspired they were by her courage. Others offered hugs, handshakes, or simple words of gratitude. It was overwhelming, but also strangely heartwarming. For the first time in a long while, Maya felt like she was making a difference, not just in her own life, but in the lives of others. One afternoon, while running errands downtown, Maya stopped by the local hardware store to pick up supplies for her dad's garden. As she browsed the aisles, an elderly man approached her, his face lined with age but his eyes bright with admiration. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said softly, tipping his worn baseball cap. "Are you the lady from the diner?" Maya hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I am," she replied cautiously, unsure of where this conversation might lead. The man smiled, relief washing over his features. "I just wanted to say thank you," he continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I've lived here my whole life, and I've seen those bikers cause trouble for years. No one ever stood up to them before. You showed us what real bravery looks like." His words caught Maya off guard. She hadn't expected such heartfelt gratitude, especially from someone who appeared so humble. "Thank you," she said finally, offering him a small smile. "But I didn't do anything special, I just did what needed to be done." "That's exactly why it matters," the man insisted, shaking his head. "You didn't scream or shout or try to make a scene. You stayed calm and handled things with dignity. That's something we can all learn from." Maya nodded politely, feeling a lump rise in her throat. Conversations like this were happening more frequently now, and while part of her appreciated the sentiment, another part wished she could disappear back into anonymity. Still, she couldn't deny the impact her actions were having. The town felt different, lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. People walked taller, spoke louder, and smiled more often. Even the diner seemed busier than usual, its booths filled with patrons eager to catch a glimpse of the woman who had stood her ground. Word of Maya's heroics eventually reached the ears of the diner's owner, a kind-hearted man named Frank, who had always valued peace over conflict. He called her one evening, inviting her to come back for dinner on the house. "Consider it our way of saying thanks," he told her warmly. "You've done something remarkable, and we'd be honored to have you here." Reluctantly, Maya accepted the invitation. When she arrived the following night, she was greeted with applause, not just from Frank and his staff, but from nearly every customer in the place. Plates clinked against tables as people stood to cheer, their faces beaming with pride. Maya blushed deeply, unused to being the center of attention. She waved awkwardly, mouthing a silent "thank you" as she slid into her usual booth. Frank brought her a plate piled high with food: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, collard greens, and a slice of peach cobbler for dessert. "This is from all of us," he said, setting it down with a flourish. "We're proud to call you one of our own." As Maya ate, she noticed subtle changes in the diner's atmosphere. Patrons chatted animatedly, sharing jokes and laughter, instead of casting nervous glances toward the door. The tension that had once hung heavy in the air was gone, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and mutual respect. Even the jukebox seemed livelier, its tunes blending seamlessly with the buzz of conversation. After finishing her meal, Maya lingered for a while, chatting with Frank and a few regulars who stopped by to express their gratitude. One woman, a schoolteacher named Linda, pulled up a chair and introduced herself. "I teach history at the high school," she explained, her voice brimming with excitement. "Your story, it's incredible. I want to share it with my students. Would you mind coming in to talk to them, just for a few minutes?" Maya hesitated, surprised by the request. Public speaking wasn't her strong suit, and she worried about being put on a pedestal. But Linda's enthusiasm was infectious, and after a moment's consideration, she agreed. "Sure," she said with a shrug. "If it helps, I'll do it." The visit to the high school took place 2 days later. Maya arrived early, clutching a notebook filled with notes she'd scribbled the night before. Standing in front of a classroom full of teenagers made her nervous, but the students' curiosity quickly put her at ease. They listened intently as she recounted the events at the diner, asking thoughtful questions about everything from self-defense techniques to how she remained so calm under pressure. "What did you feel when he grabbed your arm?" one boy asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Maya thought for a moment before answering. "Anger, sure," she admitted. "But mostly, I felt determined. Determined not to let him win. Not to let fear control me." Another student raised her hand. "Do you think violence is ever okay?" It was a tough question, one Maya had grappled with throughout her career. "Violence shouldn't be the first option," she replied honestly. "But sometimes standing up for yourself means taking action. The key is knowing when and how to respond. It's about protecting yourself and others without crossing lines." Her words resonated deeply with the students, many of whom stayed after class to thank her personally. One girl, barely older than a freshman, hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're my hero," she whispered. "I'm scared of bullies too, but hearing your story makes me feel stronger." Moments like these reminded Maya why she had chosen to serve, not just in the military but in life itself. Every act of courage, no matter how small, had the power to inspire others. And while she couldn't erase racism or prejudice overnight, she could plant seeds of change, one person at a time. News of Maya's visit to the high school spread quickly, catching the attention of local media outlets. A reporter from the town's newspaper interviewed her for a feature story, which ran on the front page the following week. The headline read, "Local Hero Stands Up to Hate, How One Woman Changed a Town." Though Maya cringed at the word hero, she understood the importance of shining a light on issues like racism and bullying. If her story could spark meaningful conversations, then perhaps the attention was worth it. In the weeks that followed, Maya received invitations to speak at community events, church gatherings, and even a veterans luncheon. Each time, she accepted reluctantly, reminding herself that her experiences could help others navigate similar challenges. Her talks focused less on the physical altercation and more on resilience, leadership, and the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. Through it all, Maya remained grounded, refusing to let the praise go to her head. She continued spending time with her family, helping her dad tend to his garden and teaching her nieces how to ride bikes. To her, these moments were far more valuable than any accolade. Yet she couldn't deny the profound effect her actions had on the town and on herself. One evening, as she sat on the porch with her mom, watching fireflies dance in the twilight, Maya reflected on everything that had happened. "Do you think things will really change?" she asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Her mom smiled, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "Change takes time, sweetheart, but you've planted a seed, and sometimes that's all it takes to start something beautiful." Maya nodded, feeling a flicker of hope ignite within her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would always be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But for now, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, one act of courage could ripple outward, inspiring others to follow her lead. As the weeks turned into months, Maya's life began to settle into a new rhythm. The initial wave of attention had subsided somewhat, though people still occasionally stopped her in the grocery store or at the gas station to express their gratitude. Some asked for advice on how to handle difficult situations, while others simply wanted to shake her hand and thank her for being a role model. Maya took it all in stride, never seeking the spotlight but also understanding that her actions had touched something deeper in the community. Her visits to the diner became less frequent, not because she didn't enjoy the food or the company, but because she didn't want to overshadow the other patrons. Still, whenever she did stop by, Frank made sure to seat her in her favorite booth and bring out an extra slice of pie. "You're part of the family now," he'd say with a wink, and Maya couldn't help but smile. It was strange, she thought, how one act of defiance could turn strangers into allies, even friends. But beyond the small-town camaraderie, Maya's story had started to reach farther than she ever imagined. A local news article about her incident caught the eye of a journalist from a national magazine who reached out to write a feature on her. At first, Maya hesitated. She wasn't comfortable with the idea of becoming a public figure, especially when so much of her identity was tied to her service in the military. But after some encouragement from her family, and a promise that the focus would be on resilience rather than heroics, she agreed to share her story. The resulting piece painted a vivid picture of Maya's journey, from her childhood in a tight-knit Texas town to her years of rigorous training in the U.S. Army, and finally to that fateful day at the diner. The journalist highlighted not just the physical confrontation, but the emotional weight behind it. The frustration, the determination, and ultimately, the quiet strength that defined Maya's response. When the article was published, it resonated deeply with readers across the country. Messages poured in from people of all walks of life, thanking her for inspiring them to stand up against injustice in their own lives. One letter in particular stood out. It came from a young woman named Sarah, who described herself as shy and insecure. "I've always felt invisible," Sarah wrote. "Like my voice didn't matter. But reading your story made me realize that courage isn't about being loud or fearless. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. Thank you for showing me that I can make a difference too." Maya read the letter several times, her heart swelling with emotion. She hadn't set out to inspire anyone, let alone someone like Sarah. Yet here was proof that her actions had sparked something meaningful, a ripple effect that extended far beyond the walls of that little diner. Back in her hometown, Maya continued to speak at community events, sharing her experiences with audiences ranging from school children to senior citizens. Her talks evolved over time, shifting away from the specifics of the diner incident to broader themes of leadership, perseverance, and empathy. She emphasized the importance of listening to others, of finding common ground, even in moments of conflict. "Courage isn't about winning fights," she often said. "It's about standing firm in your values, no matter what comes your way." Her words struck a chord, particularly among veterans and active duty soldiers who attended her presentations. Many approached her afterward, sharing their own struggles with discrimination and prejudice both within and outside the military. Some admitted they'd been hesitant to report incidents of bias, fearing retaliation or dismissal. Others confessed they weren't sure how to respond when faced with hate speech or harassment. Maya listened patiently, offering guidance based on her own experiences. "You don't have to confront every battle head-on," she told them during one session. "Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do. Other times, standing your ground sends a message that can't be ignored. The key is knowing yourself and trusting that you'll make the right choice when the moment comes." Her advice resonated deeply, earning her invitations to speak at military bases and veteran organizations nationwide. Though she remained humble about her growing influence, Maya recognized the opportunity to create change on a larger scale. She began working with diversity training programs, helping develop workshops designed to address issues of racism, sexism, and inequality in the armed forces. Her goal was simple: to ensure that no soldier felt marginalized or unheard, regardless of their background. Despite her expanding responsibilities, Maya never lost sight of what mattered most. She returned home regularly to spend time with her family, cherishing the quiet moments that grounded her. Whether it was baking cookies with her nieces, fishing with her dad, or sitting on the porch with her mom, these routines kept her connected to the things that truly defined her. Still, there were moments when the weight of everything threatened to overwhelm her. Late at night, lying awake in bed, she sometimes replayed the diner incident in her mind, wondering if she could have handled it differently. What if she'd tried talking to the biker instead of resorting to physical self-defense? Could she have de-escalated the situation without throwing a punch, or more accurately, a perfectly executed wrist lock? These questions lingered not as doubts, but as reminders of the complexity of human interaction. Maya knew there were no easy answers, no perfect solutions. Every conflict was unique, shaped by its context and participants. All she could do was trust her instincts and learn from each experience, carrying those lessons forward into the future. Eventually, Maya's leave ended, and she prepared to return to active duty. Saying goodbye to her family was bittersweet, as it always was, but this time felt different. She wasn't just leaving as Lieutenant Maya Johnson, decorated soldier and dedicated daughter. She was leaving as someone who had inspired countless others, someone whose story had sparked conversations about courage, resilience, and justice. On her last day in town, the community threw her a farewell party at the diner. The place was packed, with locals spilling out onto the sidewalk and hanging banners that read, "Thank you, Maya," and "Our hometown hero." Frank served free meals to everyone in attendance, while a local band played upbeat tunes in the background. Maya stood near the center of it all, overwhelmed by the love and support surrounding her. When it came time for her to speak, she stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I didn't set out to change anything," she began, looking out at the sea of familiar faces. "All I wanted was to live my life without fear of being judged for who I am. But somewhere along the way I realized that standing up for myself meant standing up for others too. And that's something we can all do. Every single one of us." Her words earned a thunderous round of applause, followed by cheers and whistles. As she stepped down from the makeshift stage, people lined up to hug her, shake her hand, or simply tell her how much she meant to them. By the end of the night, Maya's cheeks hurt from smiling, but her heart felt full. The next morning, she boarded a plane back to base, her duffel bag packed with homemade snacks and handwritten notes from well-wishers. As the aircraft soared into the sky, she gazed out the window, watching the landscape shrink below her. For the first time in a long while, she felt a profound sense of purpose, not just as a soldier, but as a catalyst for change. In the months that followed, Maya carried her hometown spirit with her wherever she went. She continued speaking out against prejudice, using her platform to amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard. Her story became a beacon of hope for those struggling to find their footing in a world rife with division and hatred. And though she knew the fight was far from over, she faced it with unwavering resolve, driven by the belief that courage, empathy, and unity could transform even the darkest corners of society. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to stand firm, to remind the world what true strength looks like. And for Maya, that truth was worth fighting for again and again.